This is the country my father moved us to in 1977. Although I don't have much of an accent left, a couple of whiskeys maybe, I was born and raised in London, England. My father was an entrepreneur, grew up in World War II. My grandfather fought the Nazis and was a prisoner of war in Nazi-occupied France for 4 years. My dad grew up in the German Blitz. You know your history, 71 nights in the tube before they moved him to Northampton outside of London. So England in the 1970s was a very socialist. I was too young, I was 8 years old when I came here. It was a very socialist economy. We had strikes every single week. From any utility you care to mention, gas, electricity, down to our milkmen. We had milkmen back in the day. Anybody else? My family, all my family moved to different corners of the world. My great uncle, he moved to Switzerland. That was the Cayman Islands of the 70s. My other uncle and my cousins moved to Australia. My father moved us here to Southern California. I grew up in Woodland Hills in the 80s. And in 1977, I went to public school. In 1978, I was ripped out of public school because Jerry Brown decided busing. Now, that was the beginning of the 40 years of decline here in California. And we all know where California stands today. It is no longer the best business climate. It is no longer the best schools that it was in 1977. It is down pretty close to the bottom. We're kind of tied with Alabama. And education, I'm sorry, Alabama and Mississippi are also down there. 48, 49, and 50. But it started before that. It started before Reagan left the governor's mansion in Sacramento. It goes all the way back to the Frankfurt School. And those here who are readers, you know what I'm talking about. The Marxists and the economists, and the communists, I should say, that grew up and went to school in the Goethe University in Frankfurt were not welcome in 1930s Germany. Yes, even Germany didn't want communists. And they found refuge in the United States, specifically at the Columbia School University, where they thanked America for their refuge by subverting it, ensconcing themselves in academia and teaching generations of open-minded students how to question everything. Moral relativism was the lesson of the day and the lesson of the decade that has now turned into 7 decades. Many of their students became professors themselves. They ended up teaching the boomers who followed the beatnik generation. These young teachers hid in the universities, yet on the weekends they marched in the streets against every cause they felt went against their utopian mindset, while their contemporaries were sent to Southeast Asia. They successfully adopted the second wave feminists, the countercultural movement, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, all eventually taking over the ivory towers of our universities across this country. And many of the students the Frankfurt School taught became teachers and professors who went on to teach the next generation of teachers and professors, and today we are now indoctrinating our children with the 3rd generation of the Frankfurt School. Many of them also went into media, corporate America, or government positions. This is what the Italian communist theoretician Antonio Gramsci coined the long march through the institutions. You've heard that term. It's where it comes from. We know the results. Today, schools require comfort circles if a conservative has the audacity to come and speak to their students. We can no longer refer to each other as male or female. A good friend of mine, a Special Forces veteran from Iran and Iraq, he now works at a local college here in Southern California. He just received a letter. He sent it to me by email yesterday or Tuesday, I think it was, from the, now get this, from the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at his school. Let me say that again, folks. A 6-figure position at a local college titled the Director of Diversity and Inclusion. And it required his presence at a gender workshop. The free speech ideals at college are not just under attack, but are now totally restricted under the guise of not offending anyone. We have Antifa, masked and hooded youth violently protesting the audacity of a Ben Shapiro or a Michael Knowles when they speak at universities. I had a guest on my show, Steve Hayward. He's a professor at UC Berkeley and a contributor at Powerline.com. He told me he wanted Charles Murray, whose book The Bell Curve made liberal heads explode in the 90s. You may recall they misinterpreted his study regarding IQ and race, and of course he was now a racist because he did a study on this. Everything is racism. Professor Hayward wanted Charles Murray to speak to his class, his lecture hall, but to have him come and speak to his class, they had to do it hidden from sight. Without announcing who their guest was, he knew there would be a protest. He told his students to all turn off their phones, no pictures, no texts, no Facebook, no Instagrams, and they hid Charles Murray, an accomplished author of many, many books, under a raincoat from his car, like he was being indicted by the Justice Department, and let him into the lecture hall. Now, according to Steve, the students absolutely loved Murray's lecture. They all stated they learned so much from him because it's a new perspective that they were not getting elsewhere on campus. The problem isn't the students, folks. They're hungry for knowledge. But after 70 years of the descendants from the Frankfurt School in academia, we are now facing a profound set of choices for the future of America. On one side, we have the normals. That's you folks, by the way. Congratulations. You, I, every other hardworking person that wants to provide for their families and to better their country, to be left alone by an encroaching centralized government, and generally approve of the policies of President Donald Trump, no matter what you think of him personally. And the other side. This other side is loud and perpetually angry. They have not stopped shouting at us since losing the unlosable election of 2016. They own academia. They own the media. They own pop culture. We see them in our sports and in our corporations. As the schools have been seeding them into the institutions for decades. And yes, we even see them on the right. Fifth columns under the guise of principled conservatism. These former icons of the conservative movement, principled conservatives, they call themselves. People like Bill Kristol, Charlie Sykes, Max Boot, Jennifer Rubin, and others did everything that they could to prevent a President Donald Trump. They talked a good game about tax reform, reducing regulations, and appointing conservative judges. But even after this president has shown he is doing more for the conservative cause than any president since Reagan, and in some cases even more so than Reagan, our never-Trumpers have not gone so quietly into the swamp. But much like their dismayed friends on the left, they have doubled down. Never Trump is still very much a thing. Bill Kristol, Max Boot, and the rest of the never-Trumpers deeply feel that Trump doesn't fit the mold the patricians, like Bill Kristol, thinks is the mold for conservatism. And you may agree with him. He's got some followers still. The Kristol's cocktail party set, which mostly are made up of media elites that he became chummy with over the past 35 years, no longer have the keys to the kingdom. They have been kicked out of Trump's DC for very good reason. They did everything they possibly could to prevent Donald Trump from becoming president. And Kristol even went as far as running a frightfully inept candidate. Does anybody remember Utah's Evan McMullen, or as conservative Twitter calls McMuffin? On one of the last, if not the last, Weekly Standard cruise, I sat down with Bill Kristol and did an interview for my show. It was right after the election in 2016. And I asked him, I said point blank, I said, Bill, you worked your heart out for the past year to prevent this happening. Now, he is President-elect Donald Trump. Will you support him? And he said to me, Dave, he says, if he pushes for conservative judges, repeals regulations, and pushes tax reform, I will stand behind him.
Where is he? Where is he?
He lied to me and he lied to you because he lied to the camera. And I've got no ill will to Bill Kristol personally. He seems like a good family man. But his Twitter feed against Trump, if you've been watching it, reads like Mother Jones or Media Matters, filled with hate, not just towards this president, but towards you if you support this president. His new dismal effort called The Bulwark. Anybody heard of that? It's a new publication, online magazine, after losing Weekly Standard, and he got into a shouting match online with who? A Democrat? A liberal? A progressive? No. The Bulwark's #1 enemy for the entire month of March was Victor Davis Hanson, fellow at the Hoover Institute, author of many a book, his latest, The Case for Trump, great book, by the way. We just interviewed VDH. We went up to his farm in the Central Valley, which is in miles of almond trees. It's the type of place that Bill Kristol and Max Boot would drive through as fast as they possibly could from an event in Silicon Valley down to Beverly Hills. This is where Victor Davis Hanson lives. It's called Red State, California. Yes, there is actually still a there. I asked VDH why these former icons of the conservative movement don't acknowledge Trump is one of the, if not the, most conservative president of our lifetimes when it comes to actually pushing conservative policies. His reply, as always, is brilliant. Victor said, their problem with Trump is that they think he is so far beyond the pale, so far beyond presidential behavior, that Trump, the man, nullifies all of their previous commitments to issues they stood for and supposedly shared with Trump. So Victor asks, how do we adjudicate this? He says, well, let's take a look at Trump's first 2.5 years and compare this with other presidents. Let's look at Clinton. Did Trump have sex with an intern on the Resolute desk? Or frisk a girl in the hallway? No, he didn't. Let's look at LBJ. Very successful president. Did Trump pick up animals by their ears? Does he pull out his genitals and expose them to his staff? Does he sit on the toilet and defecate while discussing policy with his staff? Did he have affairs in the White House? No. Okay, so let's go back to JFK. Does he deflower virgins on the presidential bed? Does he have orgies in the pool with his aide? No. Okay, so maybe we should go all the way back to Harry Truman. Does he write letters to music critics threatening to emasculate their genitals? No. And I didn't know Harry did that, by the way. Is Ivanka Trump scurrying around the White House, setting up trysts for her husband the way Eleanor Roosevelt did for Lucy Mercer? No. The constant barrage of incredulity by the never-Trumpers, where they are standing on the principle of my principles, on the pedestal, I should say, of my principles, suggests that they and most of the left don't know their history of presidential behavior while they are in office. They are blinded by their hatred of the man and being kicked out of the cocktail circuit and being relegated to the basement of the Trump derangement news of CNN and MSNBC, and it's about them. It's about their egos. They hate that nobody outside their small group of followers, nobody listens to them anymore. Is Trump unconventional? Well, could you imagine a Romney or a George W. Bush or even Obama getting into a wrestling ring? Not at all. The man owned casinos, for crying out loud, and has the strangest mop of hair, which most of us thought was a rug for years before I actually saw it blowing in the wind during the campaign. But this is a man who was also in commercial real estate in New York City, one of the most corrupt and dirty industries in already one of the most corrupt and dirty cities in the country. The man openly stated during the campaign that he bribes politicians because that's what you do if you want to get anything done.
That's true.
The man is nothing like a politician, and people love that. Politicians are despised, and that, along with his policy and his economic successes, is why you should probably do what Goldman Sachs and the rest of Wall Street did just last week, and that is give Trump a 70% chance of re-election.